Good morning and welcome back. I'm so glad to have you here. So, today let's open with our offertory blessing. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all the good I am and have, all the good I give and receive. Love is something if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something if you give it away, you end up having more. It's just like a magic penny. Hold on tight and you won't have any. Lend it, spend it, and you'll have so many. They'll roll all over the floor. Love is something if you give it away, give it away, give it away. Love is something if you give it away, you end up having more and more and more and more and more. All right, so today we're going to be talking about race. And race is something that humans made up not that long ago in comparison to how long humans have been around. And so race is something that people use to distinguish differences between people. And seeing differences by itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but when we start grouping people, we start separating them and feeling like they're so different from each other, and they're really not. And so one way that race is determined is by biological. And so people's hair and their skin color. And since we know that race was made and invented by humans, it's not a scientific thing per se. It is not an absolute truth. It is something that was made up and does not necessarily need to stick around too long if we want to learn to really be close to one another and see the similarities between each other instead of differences. So today we're going to take a look at a book, and this book is called The Story of Ruby Bridges. The Story of Ruby Bridges by Robert Coles. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. We were very poor, very, very poor, Ruby said. My dad worked picking crops. We just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops, so my dad lost his job, and that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I think I was 4. In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day, and after they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit, Ruby's mother said. We wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start. At the time, black children and white children went to separate schools in New Orleans. The black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair, and it was against the nation's laws. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. 3 of the girls were sent to McDon 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to first grade in William Frantz Elementary School. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in an important event in American history. They went to church. We sat there and prayed to God, Ruby's mother said, that we'd all be strong and we'd have courage and we'd get together through any trouble. And Ruby would be good girl, and she'd hold her head up high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to all the American people. We prayed long and we prayed hard. On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the Frantz Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police did not help Ruby. The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. Every day for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to France Elementary School surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail. Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed toward her. The marshals kept them from Ruby, but by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. When Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone except for her teacher, Miss Henry. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn to eat lunch with. But every day, Ruby went to school in the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to her business of learning. She was polite and she worked well at her desk, Miss Henry said. She enjoyed her time there. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I've ever taught. So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom in an empty building. Sometimes I'd look at her and wonder how she did it, Miss Henry said. How she went by those moms and sat here all by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and so comfortable. Miss Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was really nervous and afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful, or if she'd gradually begin to wear or even decide she no longer wanted to go to school. Then one morning, something happened. Miss Henry stood by a window in her classroom as she usually did, watching Ruby walk toward the school. Suddenly, Ruby stopped, right in front of the mob of howling and screaming people. She stood there facing all those men and women. She seemed to be talking to them. Miss Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what Ruby could be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Then Ruby stopped talking and walked into the school. When she went into the classroom, Miss Henry asked her what happened. Miss Henry told Ruby she'd been watching and that she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked to the mom. Ruby became irritated. I didn't stop and talk with them, she said. Ruby, I saw you talking, Miss Henry said. I saw your lips moving. I wasn't talking, said Ruby. I was praying. I was praying for them. Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from the school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning, she forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual. After she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said the prayer she repeated twice a day before and after school. Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So you could forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said terrible things about you. So, in our book, Ruby Bridges is dealing with being one of the first African American girls to get to go to school in a white school. And we might think that that's kind of strange to have people fighting over who can go to their school and who can't, because today children of all colors of skin can go to school together. But at that time, they were separated. And the government decided that it was not fair to separate in that way, right? They wanted equal rights for everyone. And so you might still hear people talking about equal rights because some things still aren't fair today. But Ruby showed great courage and strength through her faith in God. And what did she do every day before she walked into that school building? That's right, she prayed. And when she prayed, was she praying for her safety? No, she had faith that she would be safe. She was praying for God to forgive the people that were saying those mean things about her. And she said that they just don't know what they're doing, right? That sometimes people do things and they don't really realize what they're doing. And so it's important for us to be very aware of what we do, to be aware and to show kindness through everything that we do. And it's our job to make sure that people are treated fairly, no matter what color skin they have, right? And so one thing you can do is you can tell someone if you see that something seems unfair. It's important that we speak up and we don't just sit quietly and just watch as things happen and we go, oh, that didn't look good. But we have to actually speak up. And so if you see something, you can tell your parents or a teacher. And it's important that we also learn to be friends with everyone. It's not fair to judge somebody just by the color of their skin or the color of their hair or the type of hair that they have. And so we can be part of the good and kind and loving truth. And so one thing that we talk about at Unity is that I am naturally good because God's divinity is in me and in everyone. So we know that every person everywhere is naturally good because God's inside of them. And so today I want you to have a piece of paper and you can think of a time that you have had somebody treat you unfair. And I want you to draw a picture of it, and then below it, write a prayer to forgive that person. So you can draw a picture at the top of somebody being unfair to you, and I am going to draw a picture of somebody laughing and making fun of somebody else, and then below I'm gonna write a prayer. And so my drawing's really silly, and below you can write your prayer, and you can use markers or crayons or whatever you'd like for this activity. Now, one prayer that we can say if we can't think of anything else is our closing prayer that we say every day, and you can say this any time of the day. So let's together say, the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and we are grateful. Amen.